A hidden class of medieval artisans held the true keys to royal power. These master crafters worked in secret, creating invisible inks, unbreakable codes, and ingenious locks that protected the most dangerous secrets of the crown. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these forgotten experts manipulated history from the shadows. We will uncover how a single coded tapestry could change the fate of a kingdom, and why their very existence was erased from official records. What does it mean for our history when the most influential figures are the ones we were never meant to know? Deep within the stone walls of a castle, far from the roaring forges of blacksmiths, lay a different kind of workshop. The air here was still, smelling of vinegar and dried herbs, illuminated only by the flickering light of a single candle. A master artisan was not hammering steel, but carefully painting a seemingly blank piece of parchment with a clear liquid. This was a Ciphersmith, and their craft was the deliberate creation of secrets. These shadow artisans formed a unique class of professionals, bound for life by unbreakable oaths to their royal patrons. They were masters of applied secrecy, a discipline that demanded a shocking range of skills. One individual might need the chemist's knowledge to concoct an invisible ink, the linguist's mind to devise an unbreakable code, and the cartographer's precision to draw a map with hidden routes only visible under moonlight. Their work was not to build things that were merely beautiful or strong, but to create objects that were actively deceptive. A lavish tapestry hanging in the Great Hall could, upon closer inspection by a knowing eye, contain a coded message detailing troop movements. A prince's signet ring might conceal a tiny compartment for a poison antidote. Their value was measured not in the splendor of their creations, but in the dangerous truths those creations could hide. This is why their identities were so meticulously erased. Official rolls might list a payment to the king's maker or the royal artificer, titles so vague they tell us nothing. The person, their name, their life story, all of it was submerged to protect the secrets they carried in their hands and their minds. To understand the sheer scale of their hidden influence on history, we must first recognize that they were not a single, monolithic group, but a diverse network of brilliant, anonymous specialists, each holding one piece of the kingdom's most valuable puzzle. A misplaced word in a royal court was not a simple mistake. It was a crack in the very foundation of power, one that rival nobles or foreign agents were always waiting to exploit. In this world of constant intrigue, secrecy transformed from a mere tactic into the state's most vital commodity. Monarchs needed to buy silence as surely as they bought swords or grain. They required absolute assurance that a message sent to a battlefield commander would not be read by enemy scouts. They needed to know that a treaty sealed with a rival kingdom was authentic and could not be forged by a third party seeking to spark a war. Most of all, they needed their authority to appear divinely ordained and unassailable, a mystique that required constant, invisible reinforcement. This created a unique economic demand, a royal mandate for what we might call the commodity of silence. And like any valuable commodity, it needed producers. The hidden artisans became the sole manufacturers of this essential, intangible good. They were the ones who guaranteed that a sealed letter could only be read by its intended recipient, using a wax seal so complex it was impossible to duplicate without the master craftsman's unique tools. They engineered the authentication systems on official documents, embedding tiny, nearly invisible flaws in the royal watermark that proved a document was genuine. Their work in creating unbreakable codes and invisible inks ensured that spies could move through hostile territories, carrying entire battle plans in a seemingly innocent merchant's ledger. This systemic, kingdom-wide need for concealment is what fueled the entire hidden economy of these workshops. It was a demand that never ceased, because the moment a monarch's secrets became vulnerable, their grip on the throne began to loosen. The most secure workshop was not a dark dungeon, but a sunlit room above a busy guild hall. Royal artisans often worked in the last places anyone would think to look, surrounded by the ordinary noise of commerce or the quiet devotion of a monastery. These locations were chosen with deliberate genius, offering both perfect anonymity and a ready-made excuse for constant comings and goings. A steady stream of messengers entering a guild hall raised no suspicion, while a monastery's reputation for peaceful scholarship provided ideal cover for the intense, secret work happening within its walls. Some workshops were temporary and entirely mobile, packed into chests and reassembled inside the king's own campaign tent on the eve of a battle. This allowed for the immediate creation of coded dispatches and the rapid deciphering of captured enemy messages right at the front lines. But the permanent workshops were true marvels of hidden architecture. A seemingly solid bookcase in the palace library might swing open to reveal a narrow staircase. A section of ornate wall paneling could conceal a small, soundproof chamber where the soft scratching of quills was the only sound. The rooms themselves were engineered for secrecy. Thick tapestries lined with wool-absorbed sound, while complex mechanical locks, often designed by the artisans themselves, secured the only entrance. The layout was also a security measure. Tasks were physically separated so that the person mixing the invisible ink never saw the message being written, and the individual encoding that message never learned the identity of the agent who would carry it. This compartmentalization ensured that no single craftsperson, even under duress, could ever betray the entire operation. The very walls were part of the secret, a physical manifestation of the silence they were built to protect. A captured messenger carried no weapon, only a roll of blank parchment that seemed to prove his innocence. Yet when his royal captor, acting on a whisper of suspicion, held that same parchment near the warmth of a fire, a startling transformation occurred. Faint brown letters began to bleed into view, outlining the precise deployment of an enemy army. This was not magic, but the meticulous science of sympathetic inks, the first and most vital craft in the hidden artisan's arsenal. These substances were far more sophisticated than common lemon juice. Master ink makers worked with the acidic juices extracted from gallnuts, the metallic salts of vitriol, and even solutions made from milk or vinegar. Each formula was a secret recipe, designed to be utterly invisible on the page until it met its one specific key. That key could be heat from a flame, the gentle brush of a chemical reagent like sodium carbonate, or in some desperate cases, the application of something as ordinary as urine. The true genius of the system lay in its dual secrecy. The recipe for the ink itself was one guarded mystery, but the knowledge of how to make it appear was the second, and often even more closely held. Only the scribe who wrote the message and the single individual meant to read it would possess that crucial piece of the puzzle. This required the artisans to be part chemist and part spy, their workshops functioning as primitive laboratories where alchemical knowledge was applied to the direct needs of the state. They were not just making things disappear, they were controlling the very nature of information itself, deciding who was worthy of seeing the truth and when. This foundational craft of making words vanish and reappear set the stage for an even more complex challenge. Once a message could be made invisible, the next logical step for these masters of secrecy was to ensure that even if it was discovered and read, its true meaning would remain forever locked away. A royal marriage contract filled with formal declarations of peace and prosperity could also carry a declaration of war. The key lay not in the obvious text but in the pattern. If you read only every third word, the flowery prose might collapse into a stark military ultimatum. This was the art of steganography, the craft of hiding a message in plain sight, and it demanded a mind capable of seeing two realities at once. Artisans became masters of this layered deception. They did not just hide the message, they disguised it as something else entirely. An illuminated manuscript, a beautiful book of prayers, could become a secret ledger. The number of petals on a specific flower might correspond to a letter of the alphabet. The intricate pattern woven into a tapestry's border could spell out the name of a traitor. The message was camouflaged within the art itself, making the very beauty of the object a part of its security. But steganography was only the first layer. To protect a message that was discovered, these artisans employed a second, even more powerful tool, the cipher. They developed complex systems of substitution, where each letter of the alphabet was replaced with another symbol or letter according to a prearranged key. More advanced were the nomenclators, which were essentially secret codebooks. These books assigned innocent-looking words to represent sensitive people, places, or actions. The word merchant might secretly mean spy, while a shipment of wool could signify a regiment of soldiers. The codebook itself was as valuable as a chest of gold, and often designed to be destroyed after a single crucial use, its contents memorized by a trusted few. The mental discipline required for this work was immense. A Ciphersmith needed the literacy of a scholar, the logical mind of a mathematician, and the creative cunning of a playwright. They were not merely technicians, they were architects of an alternate language, building a hidden world of meaning that existed parallel to our own. This ability to think in abstracts, to hold multiple layers of information in their mind at once, was a skill that translated directly into their most tangible creations. The same mind that could hide a battle plan inside a love sonnet was also perfectly suited to designing the ingenious physical mechanisms that would protect the objects carrying those secrets. A jewel chest offered as a diplomatic gift could be a beautiful assassination waiting to happen. This was the third craft, the engineering of secure containers and tricklocks, where physical deception became a deadly art. Artisans specializing in wood and metal did not just build sturdy boxes, they designed psychological puzzles. A lock might appear simple, but turning the key the wrong way would trigger an internal mechanism to jam it permanently, or worse, release a hidden poison needle into the thumb of the curious opener. The goal was not only to protect but to punish intrusion. These masters of mechanical deception created boxes with false bottoms and compartments that only slid open when specific, disguised panels were pressed in a precise sequence. One wrong move, and the secret chamber would remain forever sealed, its contents lost. The true genius of these objects lay in their flawless craftsmanship. A security box had to be a masterpiece of fine art, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and polished to a mirror shine, because any flaw or rough edge might betray its true, secretive nature. It had to appear utterly ordinary, a mere beautiful object, while functioning as a high-security vault. This tangible, physical layer of protection was the perfect counterpart to the intangible secrecy of codes and invisible inks. It showed a holistic philosophy of security, where a single secret was wrapped in multiple layers of defense. A sensitive document might be written in invisible ink, then encoded with a cipher, and finally locked inside a box that was itself a trap. The artisans were not just protecting information, they were building fortresses around it, ensuring that even if one layer was breached, others would hold firm. But how did these masters of secrecy, these architects of silent power, managed to operate for generations without their names ever being recorded. Their success created their greatest vulnerability, for the most dangerous secret of all was their own existence. A sealed charter, its wax bearing the unmistakable mark of a long-dead pope, could grant a king the divine right to a contested duchy. Such a document did not need to be real, it only needed to be believed. This was the domain of the fourth craft, the art of forgery, where artisans became masters of manufactured truth. Their task was not to hide a message, but to create an entire false reality so convincing it could rewrite history itself. Imagine the pressure on a workshop tasked with fabricating an ancient land grant to legitimize a shaky territorial claim. The artisan responsible needed the mind of a historian and the hands of a time traveler. They had to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of parchment types, knowing that a document supposedly from the 12th century could not be written on the thicker, rougher parchment common in the 14th. They needed to replicate the exact shade of iron gall ink used by a specific monastic scriptorium 100 years prior, and master the unique scribble hand, the very penmanship of a region that had not existed for generations. Every detail, from the way the wax seal cracked as it cooled to the specific formula of the gum used to affix it, had to be perfect. Their workshops doubled as laboratories for artificial aging. They developed chemical baths to stain new parchment with the perfect yellowed patina of age, and they knew just how to gently abrade the edges with pumice stone to mimic centuries of careful handling. They could replicate the complex seals of noble houses or even the papal chancery with such precision that the forgery was often indistinguishable from the original, even to the eyes of contemporary experts. For these craftsmen, the ethical lines were perpetually blurred. Their loyalty was not to historical truth, but to the political needs of the crown. Their genius was measured by their ability to deceive the most educated minds in the kingdom, to make a lie so beautiful and so perfectly crafted that it was accepted as fact. This deliberate manipulation of reality through document creation was a silent, potent form of warfare. And it was this same philosophy of shaping perception that guided their most public-facing work, where art itself was transformed into a tool of royal propaganda, designed not to hide the truth, but to build an unshakable myth in the minds of the people. A king's authority was woven directly into the threads of a grand tapestry. These artisans were masters of visual propaganda, transforming royal halls and public spaces into theaters of power. Their craft was the deliberate encoding of political messages and divine legitimacy into every color, symbol, and carved surface. The specific shade of purple in a royal robe was not an aesthetic choice, but a direct reference to imperial Roman power. The lion emblazoned on a shield was not just a fierce animal, but a calculated symbol of courage and rightful dominion over the land. Even the architectural details of a cathedral, commissioned by the crown, were designed to direct the eye and the mind toward the king's God-given right to rule. These craftsmen operated with a deep, intuitive understanding of the psychology of imagery. They knew that a population that could not read complex legal documents could still understand and internalize a story told through a stained glass window or a sculpted frieze. A tapestry depicting the king valiantly slaying a dragon was never just a myth. It was a clear allegory for his recent defeat of a rebellious duke, a visual lesson for any noble who might entertain similar thoughts of defiance. The message was simple, direct, and unforgettable. The king was the hero, his enemies were monstrous, and his victory was preordained. This constant, subtle reinforcement shaped the very reality people lived in, making the established social order feel as natural and unchangeable as the seasons. But who were the individuals capable of such sophisticated psychological manipulation? The creation of this seamless web of secrecy and propaganda required more than just isolated genius. It demanded a complex and resilient human network operating entirely in the shadows. A master woodcarver might spend his days in a bustling guild hall, publicly crafting ornate chairs for wealthy merchants, but after dark, in a locked back room, that same man would take an oath of absolute secrecy over a sacred relic, becoming part of a hidden fraternity sworn only to the crown. This was the guild within the guild, a secret society of artisans that formed the true backbone of royal security. While the public guild regulated trade, set prices, and trained apprentices in standard skills, this shadow hierarchy identified and recruited the most brilliant and discreet masters for a higher calling. Their membership was not a matter of public record, and their most important work was never signed. To ensure absolute loyalty, these positions were often hereditary, passing from father to son in an unbroken chain of trust. A son would grow up immersed in the culture of secrecy, learning from childhood that the family's true livelihood was not the public craft, but the invisible service that supported it. This hereditary system was the ultimate security measure, binding the artisan's entire lineage and legacy to the protection of the king's most dangerous secrets. Initiation into this inner circle was a terrifying and solemn affair, designed to impress upon the new member the gravity of their new life. The ceremony was less a celebration and more of a warning. A master might be required to place his hands upon a holy relic, swearing an oath that called down divine retribution not only upon himself, but upon his entire family line, should he ever betray his trust. The consequences of betrayal were made brutally clear, often described in vivid, horrifying detail. This was not an empty threat, it was a psychological binding as strong as any physical chain. Once initiated, these men operated with their own private language of recognition, a specific way of tapping a hammer on an anvil, a particular knot in an apron string, or a seemingly casual hand gesture could serve as a silent signal to identify a fellow member. This network of trusted operatives stretched across Europe, connected by a web of safe houses and intermediaries. A Ciphersmith fleeing political turmoil in France could find immediate sanctuary and work in a German workshop, identified only by his knowledge of the secret signs. This international brotherhood ensured that the craft of secrecy itself could never be fully extinguished by the fall of a single king or the chaos of a local war. The most critical function of this secret society was the careful, controlled transfer of knowledge to the next generation. Training an apprentice in this hidden craft was a process of years, built on layers of gradual revelation. A young man might spend his first 5 years learning only the public face of his trade, becoming a masterful painter or metalsmith. Only after he had proven his skill, his discretion, and his unwavering loyalty would the deeper lessons begin. His father or master would slowly introduce him to the hidden arts, first by having him prepare the base ingredients for an invisible ink without knowing its purpose. Later, he might be tasked with copying a coded message without being given the key to decipher it. This compartmentalized learning ensured that no apprentice ever held the full picture until he was ready, and more importantly, until he was trusted. The ultimate secrets, the recipes for the most potent sympathetic inks or the designs for the most complex tricklocks, were often passed on only on the master's deathbed. This ensured the knowledge was preserved, but its dissemination was tightly controlled. How did this secret education system, designed to create the perfect royal servant, ultimately shape the very identity of the artisan? The hollow compartment in a wooden beam was not an empty space but a vessel of trust. For a young apprentice, the first time his master revealed such a secret was a moment that redefined his entire life. He was no longer just a boy learning a trade, he was now a guardian of silence. This initiation was the beginning of a lifelong path built on gradual revelation, where every new skill was a test of both his hands and his heart. An apprentice might spend his first 5 years performing only the most mundane tasks, sweeping the workshop floor, preparing pigments, or sharpening tools. He was being watched constantly, his patience measured, his discretion assessed during conversations in the local tavern. The master was not just teaching a craft, he was evaluating a soul. When the apprentice was finally deemed ready, the real training began not with a flourish but with a whisper. The most dangerous knowledge was always transmitted orally. A complex cipher key or the formula for a reactive ink was never written down. It was murmured in the quiet of the workshop after hours, repeated until it was seared into memory. This practice eliminated the risk of a captured notebook or an intercepted letter. The knowledge lived and died with the person, making each artisan a living, breathing library of state secrets. Their loyalty was tested in clever, practical ways. A master might hand his apprentice a sealed letter to deliver across town, instructing him to speak to no one. Unbeknownst to the boy, the wax seal contained a minuscule amount of a pungent but harmless chemical. If the apprentice opened the letter, the scent would transfer to his hands, betraying his curiosity the moment he returned. Passing this test did not bring praise, it simply meant he was allowed to continue. Failure meant immediate, quiet dismissal from the inner circle, his aspirations for mastery forever extinguished. This relentless filtering process ensured that only the most disciplined, resilient, and utterly loyal individuals ever ascended to the rank of master. But achieving that status was not a reward, it was the assumption of a terrifying burden. The master craftsman now carried the crown's most dangerous truths in his head, making him both indispensable and eternally vulnerable, a man who could never truly be free. A master forger's greatest fear was not a flawed document, but the sound of a royal messenger at his door. Imagine the cold dread of an artisan who learns that his meticulously aged charter, created to secure a border region, has been exposed as a fake by a rival court. His work did not simply fail, it has ignited a diplomatic firestorm, giving a neighboring kingdom the perfect pretext for war. In that moment, his life was already over. The Crown's response to such a catastrophic failure was swift, brutal, and utterly public. While a public record might note the execution of a common criminal, the private royal chronicles tell a different story. These accounts whisper of punishments so severe they were designed to cauterize the very possibility of betrayal. An artisan's tongue might be cut out to prevent him from ever speaking of his craft, even under torture. His skilled hands, the instruments of his genius, could be severed, rendering him a living monument to the price of failure. For the most grievous offenses, the punishment was disappearance. An artisan would be lowered into an oubliette, a dungeon whose name comes from the French word for to forget. It was a tiny, lightless pit where a person was left to rot, fed just enough to keep them alive but utterly erased from the world. A permanent and silent reminder of the cost of a loose secret. This culture of fear was a deliberate and calculated tool of statecraft. The royal court understood that loyalty could be tested, but terror was a more reliable guarantee. The ever-present threat of a horrific end created an atmosphere of immense psychological pressure in the workshops. Every stroke of the quill, every turn of a lock mechanism, was performed under the shadow of potential ruin. This context makes their achievements almost unbelievable. The fact that they could produce works of such intricate beauty and flawless deception while living under a sword of Damocles speaks to a level of skill and mental discipline that is difficult to comprehend. It forces us to ask a profound question about the nature of their work. What kinds of secrets were so earth-shatteringly valuable that they warranted this brutal economy of silence and fear? A king's signature on a treaty was not always the final word. Sometimes it was merely the first draft in a secret campaign of deception. The hidden artisans were frequently tasked with creating duplicate versions of critical state documents, especially treaties, where a single altered clause could redirect the flow of wealth or territory for generations. A scribe working from a locked chamber might produce a perfect copy of a peace accord for public display, while simultaneously crafting a second, secret version for the king's inner circle. This backup copy contained subtle changes, perhaps shifting a border by a few crucial miles or inserting a vague promise of future military aid that the public version omitted. The goal was to create a document that could be brandished as proof of the king's honorable intentions, while holding a private, more advantageous version in reserve. This practice turned diplomacy into a layered game of illusion, where the official record was merely a prop in a much larger performance. The same principle of calculated deception applied to the very landscape of a kingdom. Cartographers in these workshops faced a unique challenge. They had to lie with the authority of truth. A royal command might require a map showing a vast, impassable swamp where none existed, or depicting a non-existent mountain pass that could lure an invading army into a fatal trap. The creation of such a false map was an act of artistic and scientific forgery. The cartographer needed an expert's understanding of geography to make the lie believable, ensuring that river systems flowed logically and the topography looked plausible. Then came the painstaking process of aging the parchment, staining it with tea and soot, and carefully fraying the edges to mimic years of use. The finished product was a weapon, designed to be captured by enemy spies and trusted as genuine. This manipulation of treaties and maps reveals that these artisans were not passive technicians. They were active geopolitical players, their quills and brushes as consequential in shaping borders and alliances as any general sword. Their work formed the bedrock of a hidden financial and territorial strategy, proving that the most valuable secrets were not just about hiding information, but about actively constructing a false reality to secure royal power and wealth. The most potent weapon in a hidden workshop was not a dagger, but a perfectly forged silver coin. While spies carried invisible messages, these artisans engaged in a more systemic form of sabotage, economic warfare, waged from the silence of their forges. A royal command could task a master metalworker with a dangerous mission to produce high-quality counterfeit coinage of a rival kingdom. This practice, known as debasing the currency, was a deliberate attack on the very foundation of a rival's power. Imagine the chaos unleashed upon a neighboring realm when its markets are suddenly flooded with fake coins. These counterfeit pieces are so expertly made, with the correct weight and the reigning monarch's profile stamped with chilling accuracy, that they are accepted without question. But their sheer volume devalues the entire currency. Prices for bread and cloth begin to skyrocket as the real value of each coin plummets. The rival king's treasury is drained, his ability to pay his soldiers evaporates, and social unrest begins to simmer. This was not a clash of armies on a field, but a silent, insidious collapse engineered by a handful of men who understood that a nation's strength flows from its coffers as much as its castles. The same principle applied to the complex world of international trade. A different artisan, a master engraver, might be ordered to create flawless replicas of another nation's official trade seals. These wax impressions authenticated cargo, proving that tariffs and taxes had been paid to the rival crown. With a perfect counterfeit seal, a kingdom's own merchants could smuggle their goods across the border, their shipments appearing perfectly legal. This allowed them to undercut local merchants and funnel vast sums of untaxed profit back to their own royal treasury, all while weakening the economic health of their competitor. This work required more than just technical brilliance in metallurgy or sculpting wax. It demanded a deep, analytical understanding of economics, trade routes, and market psychology. The artisan had to think like a merchant and a general simultaneously. Their impact was vast and invisible, manipulating the wealth of nations from a sunlit workshop, proving that the most effective siege engine could be a single, beautifully crafted lie made of metal. And if their skills could reach into the treasuries of rival kingdoms, their influence naturally extended into the most intimate and guarded spaces of their own sovereign's life. A king could be in two places at once, a feat made possible not by magic, but by the workshop's most intimate craft. In an age of portraits and vague descriptions, identity itself was a material these artisans could sculpt and reshape. Their most startling assignment was the creation of royal doubles, living decoys trained to absorb the risks meant for a monarch. These were not mere lookalikes found by chance, they were manufactured. A man with a similar build and bearing would be brought into a secret workshop, and the transformation would begin. Artisans skilled in what we would now call special effects would work for months, crafting elaborate wigs from human hair to match the king's thinning locks, using subtle wax prosthetics to reshape a nose or strengthen a jawline. They studied the monarch's gait, his posture, even the specific way he gestured when angry, drilling these mannerisms into the double until the imitation was flawless. This human disguise was a living, breathing fortress, a psychological shield designed to draw an assassin's dagger or an enemy's arrow away from the true ruler and onto a substitute. The same principles of identity concealment were applied to the kingdom's spies and diplomats. A low-level messenger could be transformed into a foreign merchant, his disguise so complete it extended to the smallest physical details. Artisans would provide him with false calluses on his hands specific to a silk trader, not a soldier. They would stain his teeth with walnut husks to mimic a lifetime of poor hygiene, fitting him with clothing tailored in a distant city's unique style. His new identity was supported by a complete backstory, memorized like a scripture, and bolstered by a set of forged documents so perfect they could withstand days of interrogation. A letter of introduction, sealed with the crest of a fictional noble house, would bear the correct watermarks and show the appropriate wear from travel. This craft demanded a terrifyingly deep understanding of human nature. The artisans had to be part sculptor, part playwright, and part psychologist. They were not just creating a costume, they were building a convincing human being from scratch, anticipating every question, every glance, every moment of doubt that could shatter the illusion. This power to reconstruct a person found a strange and powerful echo in their work on objects that were meant to channel the divine, where their skill in creating belief was directed toward the heavens themselves. A king's claim to the throne could be solidified not by an army, but by a single, ancient-looking bone. In the deeply religious landscape of the Middle Ages, faith was a currency as potent as gold, and the hidden workshops became minters of this spiritual coin. Their most audacious assignments involved fabricating the physical evidence of divinity itself. A royal command might arrive to create a relic, an object of veneration that could draw thousands of pilgrims and their wealth to a cathedral favored by the crown. A master artisan, more chemist than cleric, would set to work. A fragment of an ordinary sheep's bone could be meticulously carved, stained with centuries of simulated age using iron oxide and vinegar, and placed in an ornate reliquary of genuine antiquity. The goal was to create an object that felt holy, that inspired the awe and unquestioning belief necessary to consolidate both spiritual and temporal power. Similarly, a scribe with the soul of a playwright might be tasked with composing an entirely new gospel or a prophetic text. This was not a work of faith, but of political strategy. The document would be filled with obscure, learned references to give it an air of authenticity, but its core message would be unmistakably clear, perhaps foretelling the rise of the current monarch as a divinely chosen savior. Creating such a forgery required a chillingly deep understanding of popular piety and complex theology. The artisan had to know exactly what people yearned to believe, what kind of miracle would feel most real, and what theological loophole could be exploited to make the lie seamless. They were not just forging objects, they were manufacturing faith, building a direct and profitable link between the kingdom and the heavens. This systematic manipulation of belief reveals the ultimate expression of their craft, where the line between the workshop and the altar completely vanished. Such perfect deceptions could not be achieved with mere skill alone. They demanded a secret arsenal of raw materials, substances whose very properties were a form of magic in the right hands. A recipe for ink was a state secret more valuable than a map of the treasury. This was the domain of the workshop alchemist, the material scientist whose crucibles and alembics provided the physical substance for every act of deception. Their workbench was a strange apothecary stocked not with healing herbs, but with substances chosen for their unique and often permanent properties. They needed to create an indelible ink, one that could not be scraped away or washed off a crucial document without destroying the parchment itself. Such a formula might involve grinding gallnuts and mixing the powder with iron sulfate and gum arabic, creating a chemical reaction that literally etched the writing into the page, making any alteration impossible. For wax seals, the challenge was different. An ordinary wax could be softened by heat, the seal lifted and reattached without a trace. The alchemist's solution was a special blend. He might mix the wax with fragile resins or even finely crushed eggshell. When cooled, this composite felt and looked normal, but any attempt to pry it up would cause it to fracture in a unique, irreproducible pattern, instantly signaling tampering. Even the glues they formulated were tools of secrecy. An artisan might need to permanently seal a hollow compartment in a staff, but also ensure that a royal agent, using a specific solvent known only to them, could open it later. The alchemist would experiment with animal glues and plant gums, creating an adhesive that was strong enough to withstand years of handling, yet would instantly dissolve when touched with a drop of vinegar or alcohol. This meticulous control over the physical world extended to the very coins in the kingdom's purse. A royal command might demand the creation of a new alloy for coinage, one that mimicked the weight and ring of pure silver, but contained a significant portion of cheaper copper. The alchemist's task was to get the mixture perfect. If the coin felt too light or sounded dull when dropped, merchants would suspect a counterfeit and the entire scheme would collapse. Their most visually stunning creations, however, were the time-sensitive pigments. An alchemist could develop a paint for a portrait that initially showed the king in robust health. But the formula included chemicals that would slowly react with air and light over months or years. As the painting aged, the king's face would subtly change, his cheeks growing hollow and his skin pale, a hidden message about his failing health meant for future generations. The alchemist was the unseen foundation, the provider of the very earth and water from which the gardens of deception grew. Without their mastery of substances, the Ciphersmith would have no ink, the forger no convincing parchment, and the lockmaker no unique alloys. Their work gave every other craft its tangible form, embedding the secrets of the state into the very fibers, metals, and colors of the medieval world. A Venetian glassblower's greatest secret was not a recipe but a reflection. On the island of Murano, celebrated for its crystalline glass, a select group of masters answered to a far darker patron than any merchant. They were bound by blood oaths to the Council of Ten, Venice's ruthless state security council, and their workshops became laboratories for a new kind of sight. While the public craft produced beautiful vases and goblets, this hidden cell perfected the spy mirror. This was not a flaw, but a deliberate engineering of perception. By subtly warping the glass during its cooling process, they created a surface that, when mounted on a specific wall, would catch the reflection of documents on a magistrate's desk and make them visible to an observer hidden in an adjacent chamber. The mirror appeared to be a simple decorative piece, a symbol of wealth, while functioning as a perfect surveillance device. Their deception went even deeper. These masters developed a method of inlaying secrets into the mirror itself. Before the silvering solution was applied to the back of the glass, a scribe would use a diamond-tipped stylus to etch a message directly onto the surface. The etching was so fine it was invisible to the naked eye. Once the mirror was fully assembled, the message disappeared completely, hidden behind the reflective backing. It could only be retrieved by tilting the mirror to one exact, predetermined angle against a strong light source. At that single moment, the etching would catch the illumination and become legible, a ghostly text hovering within the reflection before vanishing again with the slightest movement. This was a secret that traveled in plain sight, a coded dispatch hanging boldly on a palace wall, immune to any search unless the searcher knew the precise secret of the light. The entire structure of the Murano Guild provided the perfect cover for this clandestine work. The island itself was a fortress, its glassmakers forbidden from leaving Venice on pain of death, a rule that protected both commercial and state secrets. Within this isolated community, the Council of 10 could easily identify and recruit the most brilliant and discreet artisans. A glassblower known for his innovative techniques might be quietly approached, his family's status and wealth secured in exchange for his absolute silence and a lifetime of service in a sealed-off section of his own workshop. The system was a masterpiece of organizational deception. The very fame of Venetian glass and the strict isolation of its makers created an ideal environment for a parallel, invisible industry of espionage. This model of a public guild shielding a hidden network of royal artisans was not unique to Venice, but it stands as one of history's most perfectly realized examples, proving that the most secure secret is one hidden not in a dungeon, but behind the glittering facade of celebrated art. A diplomatic pouch bound for a rival court required more than a simple lock. It needed a system of enforced trust. In the heart of Paris, a small, protected guild of lockmakers provided exactly that. Their public storefront on a respectable street catered to the city's nobility, selling beautifully wrought locks for jewelry boxes and private libraries. But their true workshop was hidden away in a sealed cellar deep beneath the Louvre Palace, accessible only by a private stairwell guarded day and night. Here, these masters of metal worked not for profit, but for the absolute security of the French crown. Their genius lay in translating complex political needs into flawless mechanical action. One of their most famous innovations was the dual key lock, a mechanism of brilliant simplicity and profound political wisdom. A single diplomatic pouch carrying a king's most sensitive correspondence could not be entrusted to one ambassador alone. The Parisian solution was a lock that required two entirely unique keys, held by two different officials, to be inserted and turned in perfect unison. This single mechanism physically prevented any individual from acting alone, forcing collaboration and ensuring that the contents of the pouch were only ever seen by mutual consent. It was a lock that did not just protect against thieves, but against the treachery of its own bearers. Their ingenuity did not stop there. For the royal treasury, they engineered locks that kept a silent, incorruptible record. Inside the mechanism, a complex arrangement of spring-loaded wheels and pins would advance with every turn of a key. A small, discreet window on the lock's face would display a number, revealing exactly how many times the chest had been opened. Even more astonishing, some locks were fitted with tiny, unique markers on the underside of each authorized key. When the key was used, it would leave a faint, identifiable scratch on a soft metal plate inside the lock, creating a perfect audit trail of who accessed the vault and when. This was security transformed into information, a mechanical witness that never slept and never lied. The work of these Parisian masters demonstrates the ultimate expression of the hidden artisan's craft. They were not just building barriers, they were building systems of accountability, using gears and levers to enforce the fragile political protocols upon which kingdoms depended. Their locks were more than metal, they were the physical embodiment of a state's most critical rule, that some secrets were too dangerous for any one person to hold. A silent workshop could be shattered by a single whispered confession. For all their genius and elaborate security, the networks of hidden artisans were terrifyingly fragile. Their power was built on a foundation of absolute trust, and any crack in that foundation could bring the entire structure crashing down. Exposure rarely came from a dramatic battlefield discovery. More often, it began with something small and human. A disgruntled apprentice, feeling he had not received his due reward or status, might approach a rival noble with a tantalizing piece of information. A captured artisan, subjected to the unimaginable pressures of the rack or the Iron Maiden, could find his oath of loyalty broken by sheer physical agony. Sometimes the breach was not even their fault, but the result of a rival spymaster's brilliant, patient detective work. The infamous Babington plot against Queen Elizabeth I provides a perfect, chilling example. The conspirators used a complex cipher to communicate their plans to assassinate the Queen. What they did not know was that Elizabeth's own master codebreaker, a man named Thomas Phelps, was intercepting their messages. Phelps and his team meticulously analyzed the coded letters, searching for patterns and frequencies, until they finally broke the cipher wide open. The decrypted messages did not just reveal a plot, they exposed the entire hidden network supporting it, leading directly to the execution of Anthony Babington and his co-conspirators. When such an exposure occurred, the consequences were swift and brutal. It was never a single arrest. A discovered network triggered a cascade of panic and retribution. Mass arrests would sweep through the guilds, workshops were raided and stripped of their tools, trusted artisans who had served for decades were dragged from their homes, their lifetime of service instantly invalidated by the failure of their security. Public executions served a dual purpose. They eliminated the compromised individuals and sent a stark warning to any other artisan who might consider betrayal. The kingdom's entire security apparatus, from cipher systems to diplomatic protocols, would have to be completely scrapped and rebuilt from scratch, a monumental and costly undertaking. This constant, looming threat of catastrophic failure meant these masters of secrecy lived with a unique kind of pressure. Their incredible power to shape events was always balanced on a knife's edge, perpetually one mistake, one loose word, or one smarter opponent away from total ruin. Their world was a high-stakes game where a single cracked code could topple a regime and silence a network of geniuses forever. A single invention, the printing press, shattered a centuries-old economy of secrecy. Its mechanical rhythm did not just produce books, it manufactured a new reality where information could be copied perfectly and distributed endlessly. This was a world fundamentally hostile to the hidden artisan. Their entire craft was built on the uniqueness of the object, a one-of-a-kind document with its specific parchment, its individual scribble hand, and its irreplicable wax seal. The press made every document look the same. A printed proclamation had a uniform typeface, a consistency that made the subtle variations in a master forger's handwriting instantly suspicious. The very tools of their trade, the quills and the carefully aged parchments, were becoming obsolete. How could you forge a unique land grant when the king's laws were now published in identical copies for all to see? The art of steganography, of hiding messages in the flourishes of a painted initial or the spacing between words, lost its canvas. The press standardized the page, stripping away the very textures that concealed secrets. The focus of power shifted from the workshop to the printing house. Royal security was no longer about creating a single, perfect, deceptive object. It was now about controlling the flood of information at its source. The role of the censor, the bureaucrat who could stop a press from running, began to eclipse that of the Ciphersmith who could hide a message in a tapestry. The state's need for secrecy did not vanish, of course. Spies still needed codes and diplomats still required secure communication, but the methods changed. The genius of the individual artisan, their hands-on alchemy and their intimate knowledge of materials, was no longer the primary defense of the realm. That protection now relied on administrative procedures, on lists of banned books, and on the control of distribution networks. The master forger who could age a parchment with chemicals was replaced by the official who could seize a seditious pamphlet before it reached the public square. This was a quieter, less tangible form of control. The Lockmakers' intricate mechanisms were still valuable, but the true fortress had become the system itself, a vast, impersonal bureaucracy that managed the flow of words. The guilds within guilds, the hereditary lines of sworn craftsmen, found their unique skills were no longer in such desperate demand. Their value faded not because their secrets were discovered, but because the world had simply changed around them. The candle-lit workshops grew dark, not from a single raid or betrayal, but from the relentless, quiet march of progress. The royal execution of a master forger was never recorded in the public chronicles. His death was as silent as his work, a final act of state security that completed the cycle of secrecy. This was not an accident of history, but a meticulously managed policy. The monarchs who depended on these artisans had an absolute vested interest in ensuring the methods of their deception died when the craftsmen did. Imagine the danger if a rival kingdom could capture a retired ciphersmith and extract a lifetime of code keys and ink recipes. To prevent this, royal agents would often arrive at a workshop within hours of a master's death. Their task was not to pay condolences, but to confiscate and destroy. Personal tools, coded notebooks, even half-finished experiments were gathered and burned. The physical evidence of a lifetime of genius was reduced to ash, leaving no blueprint for an enemy to follow. This purge extended to the written record. Court chroniclers, the journalists of their day, were actively discouraged or outright forbidden from mentioning these individuals by name. A payment roll might list a disbursement to the king's artificer, a title so vague it tells us nothing about the person who held it. Their breathtaking achievements in lock-making, cartographic forgery, or counterfeiting were systematically attributed to the wisdom and power of the monarch themselves. A new, unbreakable cipher was hailed as a stroke of the king's own strategic brilliance. A cleverly designed tricklock securing the treasury was presented as evidence of the crown's divine protection. The artisan was erased, and the king absorbed all credit, his aura of infallibility growing with every secret success. This systematic erasure was the final, ultimate act of secrecy. It guaranteed that the hands which built the very mechanisms of power would never be celebrated, their stories swallowed by the same silence they were hired to protect. We are not looking at a historical gap, but at a void that was deliberately and expertly carved out, a silence we are only now, centuries later, beginning to pierce. The silent workshop is finally beginning to speak. For centuries, the legacy of these artisans was defined by the void they left behind, a history of deliberate erasure. But now, modern science is acting as a master key, unlocking the physical traces they could not completely eliminate. In laboratories and archives, a new kind of detective work is underway, using tools they could never have conceived to decipher the secrets they worked so hard to protect. Multispectral imaging is one of the most powerful of these tools, a medieval manuscript that appears perfectly ordinary to the naked eye is placed under lights of different wavelengths, from ultraviolet to infrared. To the astonishment of researchers, what often emerges is a ghostly palimpsest of earlier writing, a previous text that was scraped away so the expensive parchment could be reused. But sometimes the revealed text is not an old religious tract, but a coded message or a set of financial records that were never meant to be seen. This technology can also detect the faint carbon traces of a preliminary sketch hidden beneath the final painting of a portrait, revealing a hidden map or a different facial expression that changes the entire meaning of the artwork. Chemical analysis provides another window into their world. By taking a microscopic sample of ink from a supposedly ancient charter, scientists can perform mass spectrometry. They can identify the specific metallic composition of the ink and sometimes find a telltale anachronism. A document dated to the 12th century might contain a zinc compound that was not used in ink making until the 14th, a silent scream of forgery that confirms the work of a hidden workshop. These techniques are not confined to documents. The recent discovery of a concealed room in an English manor house, hidden behind a false wall for 500 years, was a revelation. The room was not a treasure chamber but a workspace. It contained the remains of a small, sophisticated forge for fine metalwork, crucibles with chemical residues consistent with ink making, and odd, custom-shaped tools for crafting intricate locks. This was not a blacksmith's forge, it was a laboratory for secrecy, a physical snapshot of the artisan's world, frozen in time. Each of these discoveries is a single puzzle piece. A chemically anomalous ink here, a hidden message in a prayer book there, a secret workshop tucked behind a wall. When assembled, these fragments are slowly reconstructing the picture of a vast, hidden industry that operated across Europe. This scientific archaeology is the modern counterpart to their ancient crafts, a battle of wits across the centuries. We are now, finally, decoding the masters of deception, and in doing so, we are giving a form of credit to the anonymous geniuses who shaped history from the shadows. The principles perfected in those silent workshops are encoded into the very fabric of our modern world. Look at the simple tamper-evident seal on a bottle of medicine. Its plastic ring is designed to break with an audible snap if someone tries to open it, a direct and humble descendant of the medieval wax seal blended with crushed resin, engineered to fracture irreparably upon any unauthorized touch. The core idea is identical, a physical object that bears silent, undeniable witness to intrusion. Our digital lives are built upon this ancient foundation. The complex cryptographic algorithms that scramble our text messages and secure our online banking are not a new invention. They are the intellectual heirs of the substitution ciphers and nomenclators crafted in candlelit rooms. A medieval codesmith replacing the word king with merchant would instantly understand the principle of a modern encryption key that transforms readable data into an unbreakable string of gibberish. The goal is the same: to ensure that a message, even if intercepted, remains a locked box without the one unique key. This lineage extends even into the organizational charts of our most secretive institutions. The strict need to know compartmentalization practiced by intelligence agencies today is a direct echo of the medieval workshop's physical layout. Just as the artisan mixing the invisible ink never saw the message being written, a modern analyst might assess raw data without knowing the identity of the agent who collected it. This deliberate fragmentation of knowledge is not a modern innovation in security. It is a timeless strategy to protect the whole by isolating its parts, ensuring that no single person, even under duress, can compromise an entire network. Recognizing this continuous thread forces a profound shift in perspective. Our contemporary world of digital firewalls and biometric scanners is not a clean break from a more primitive past. It is simply the latest chapter in an eternal and escalating arms race, a perpetual dance between those who work to conceal and those who strive to discover. The tools have changed from quills to quantum computers, but the fundamental contest, the endless war over the control of information, remains exactly the same. Their silent craft was a form of power as decisive as any battlefield charge. We have moved from the hidden workshops to the very heart of royal courts, tracing the lives of the artisans whose tools were as potent as any sword. These individuals were not mere servants. They were the undisputed masters of illusion, the meticulous engineers of trust, and the silent, indispensable partners to the thrones of Europe. Their legacy forces us to reconsider the very nature of history itself. Our past is not solely a chronicle of great kings and famous battles won and lost. It is also, and perhaps more profoundly, the story of the unseen hands that carefully shaped those outcomes from the deepest shadows. The next time your gaze falls upon an ancient manuscript in a museum, or you examine the intricate mechanism of an antique lock, pause for a moment. Consider that you might not be looking at a simple artifact, but at a silent vessel of secrets. It could hold a hidden history, a final, faint whisper from a forgotten artisan waiting patiently to be heard across the centuries. If this journey into the hidden networks that truly shaped power has captivated your imagination, I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts on these shadowy figures in the comments below. And if you wish to continue unraveling history's greatest mysteries together, subscribing will guide you on our next discovery. A modern master locksmith, surrounded by precision tools and electric lights, struggles for weeks to replicate a single tricklock from a 500-year-old design. His hands, skilled in contemporary methods, must relearn the ancient rhythms of the file and the hand-cranked drill. Each component is filed and fitted by eye, a process demanding a level of patience that modern manufacturing has all but erased. The final mechanism, a tiny maze of springs and levers designed to jam if tampered with, is a testament to a forgotten kind of genius. It is not merely a lock, but a mechanical mind, a puzzle box that thinks like its creator. Similarly, a calligrapher attempting to recreate a sympathetic ink faces a chemist's nightmare without a laboratory. She experiments with gallnuts, vinegar, and vitriol, guided only by fragmentary historical notes. The challenge is not just mixing the ingredients, but achieving perfect consistency, batch after batch, using only medieval materials and heat sources. A single imperfection, a tiny contaminant, and the ink will either fail to appear or will darken prematurely, betraying the message it was meant to conceal. This hands-on struggle reveals a profound truth. These artisans were not merely secret keepers, they were the elite engineers and material scientists of their day. Their lost knowledge represents a staggering peak of pre-industrial craftsmanship, a summit of skill applied to the timeless problem of information security. The very tools we use to protect our digital lives today are built upon the conceptual foundations they laid down in stone-walled workshops. Their silent, meticulous work echoes in every encrypted message and tamper-proof seal, proving that the battle to control truth is a war that has always been waged by the most skilled hands of any era.